The following episode contains difficult subject matter, including references to suicide and sexual assault. Please take care. Sam Mullin's latest podcast, Sea of Lies, begins with a dead body being pulled from the depths of the Atlantic Ocean and develops into a wild international manhunt. Fisherman John Copik and his son Craig were hoping their day on the water would mean smooth sailing and finish with a good haul of cod. Instead, the duo from Devon reeled in way more than anyone would have expected, because pulling up that dead body threw them straight into the middle of an investigation that uncovered stolen identities, a con man who had duped even his closest friends and family, and of course, murder. I'm Kathleen Goldhar, and this is Crime Story. Sam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, July 28th, 1996, Copik and his son are out on the cold Atlantic Ocean off the coast of England. Paint me a picture of that day and what happens.
So Craig, he was a university kid at that time, and he sort of resented that during his summer break, he had to fish his dad or help his dad out on the fishing boat. And it was a trawling boat. So their first 3 trawls that day weren't going so well. They weren't catching any fish, not even enough fish to cover costs for the day. And then on their 3rd pull of the day, they had a net filled with fish and also, to their horror and surprise, the body of a man.
And when they pulled that guy up, what did he look like? Was had he been there a long time? Sort of, what did they see?
Yeah, the body didn't seem like it had been in the water for very long. Craig told us that normally anything on the sea floor is picked at by the crabs and little sharks down there. But this body was in really good shape. It was a man wearing like a nice button-up shirt and trousers, and his shoes were laced up. So it obviously hadn't been in the water for very long.
And I loved how you sort of go onto that boat with them and they're really making a decision about what to do. Like, I think most of our instincts would be like, holy fuck, I'm going back to town and I'm calling the cops. But they kind of had a conversation about it.
Yeah, because the last thing they wanted to do was invite cops onto the boat when they're just trying to make money, and they had a really bad day of fishing, and now they had all of these fish, and they knew that if they called in and were honest about that there was a body in the net with the fish, that they would have to kick all of those fish back into the ocean. So that would have crossed their mind. And it's interesting to think about the privacy of being out in the middle of the ocean. You know, no one is watching. Maybe it's not worth it. And there was also this urban legend that some people believe to be true, but I don't think it is true when we really looked into it, is that if no one claims this body within, I think it's 13 weeks, then the person who discovers the body is liable for the burial. That was on their mind because they thought that there was a chance that that could happen and that they would be on the hook financially for just discovering the body. But that's not what happened. So I'm sure they were relieved about that.
Relieved, but in a way, who would have imagined the actual insanity that came after they discovered who the guy was.
Exactly.
So who was he?
So the well-dressed man was also wearing a Rolex watch, and they were able, through contacting Rolex and going through old service records, they were able to get the name Ron J. Platt off of the Rolex. And he was a TV repairman who had sort of spent his adult life oscillating back and forth between Canada and the UK. So he had a maple leaf tattoo on his hand because he really loved this romantic idea of Canada, growing up in these small Western Canadian towns with his parents the dad was a teacher, a school teacher. So they'd go town to town.
You found all this out because, like, it took a while. There were some bumps and some dead ends, but eventually the cops tracked down his ex-girlfriend, whose name is Elaine, and she kind of really unpacks who Ron was and sort of talks about his Canadian love affair and all that kind of stuff. And it's not really until that point, too, that there's any sense of who would have wanted somebody like Ron dead. Like, he seemed kind of an innocuous being, right?
Yeah. What was interesting is, so Ron was a very isolated person. He wasn't in close contact with his family. He had very little friends. He was just a total introvert. And Elaine was not like that at all. She's like a very chatty, extroverted person who's close with her family and has like a huge amount of friends.
I managed to get him to talk about photography and things that he's interested in, and we hit it off quite well, yeah. I felt safe in his company. Ron was very placid, very quiet. He seemed very caring, and I felt safe with him. I felt safe around him.
So when they found Elaine, that was, if it wasn't for her, they would not know anything about his life.
It's Elaine who tells them about one of their friends, David Davis.
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about who David Davis was to Elaine and to Ron?
Elaine actually introduced Ron and David Davis to each other. She was working at an art auctioneer in this Yorkshire town called Harrogate. One day, a guy with a North American accent came in and started chatting her up about the art that he saw through the window.
In walked this gentleman, and he inquired about, well, it was a painting that was in a display cabinet outside on the pavement there. And we had a chat about auctions and about fine art, and that was really how I met him.
And their conversation went so well where he kind of turned to her and was like, I like you. You're like a special person. And, you know, I'm new to the area and I'm looking for someone to work for me at this business that I haven't even decided what it is yet. But I feel like you and I should go into business together.
It was just like he wanted to do a business that I would be happy doing. You know, if I'd have said, let's do a sweet shop, I bet you would have done that.
And she mentioned that she had a boyfriend named Ron who was saving up to go to Canada and she was going to go with him. And this guy was very excited to meet them. And it started this relationship where the plan was that he was going to hire both of them to work for him and to help them start their own business and get their own flat and just sort of become financially entwined with them. And the whole plan was that he was going to help them save up to move to Canada, which is what their number one dream was at that time.
Ron didn't really like David at first, right?
He wasn't sure of him. He was very skeptical. He's like, so some rich dude came into your place of work and said that you're so special and wants to hire you. It's like, let's zoom out and look at what this is. Like, I don't know about this. So eventually the three of them met for the first time. David Davis was like, of course your boyfriend is skeptical of me. Like, let's all get together and he can meet me and then he'll feel better about us going into business together. So I think that once Ron did meet David Davis, that David Davis was able to really charm him and impress him.
I think I like that part of it because those of us listening were like, Ron, right? We're like, give me a break. This guy obviously has got something, right? And it was his first instinct. You know, sometimes in these stories, you're sort of like the person has always been naive or is, you know, a little bit too good to other people and more willing. But I felt like this time it's like, no, this person actually was cynical about this whole idea. It was exactly the way I thought it. I was like, what are you talking about? You don't know me. Why are you being so generous? Yeah. And then obviously David Davis was so charming and engaging and charismatic that he just sucked him in.
It's really a testament to how good he was at putting people at ease.
And so kind of paint a little bit of a picture of how Ron and Elaine's life did change as they got closer and closer to David.
Well, they were both renting at that time, and David Davis was sort of like, "You're throwing money away. Like, I'll help you guys put together a down payment on a flat, and Ron, you're a TV repairman. Why are you working for these other companies? Like, let's open up a shop. You can have your own TV repair business." It must have seemed like sort of a dream come true for them,
Yeah.
at least in the early going.
Because they had kind of struggled up to that point, right? Both of them. I mean, Ron had like obviously mental health problems. He had depressive episodes.
Yeah.
Elaine seemed to be much too good a person to everybody, in my personal opinion. But like, it did feel like they sort of were walking through the world with a bit of, into the wind. And it seemed like David Davis kind of like acted as a bit of a sail.
Yeah. And imagine Elaine's point of view, where she had basically spent her whole life in Harrogate, and she had always worked as a sort of like personal assistant, a head secretary. And now all of a sudden, the work that David Davis is having her do, it's like you're flying to Paris, you're flying to Switzerland, and you're making more money than you've ever made. And it just must have seemed so exciting.
Yeah.
And I think that when people sort of make your world seem bigger, that you maybe lower your guard a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. But she was even, I mean, he started to make them do things that Elaine knew kind of in the back of her mind was problematic, right? Like you mentioned the trip to Switzerland.
Mm-hmm.
What was he getting her to do there?
That was one of the first things that he had her do was fly to Geneva, and he basically needed her to exchange a bunch of Swiss francs into sterling. Like he just, will you go and swap some currencies for me? Which is sort of a red flag. And then from there, the other red flags were, I want you to open these bank accounts, these untraceable bank accounts in your name in Switzerland. And he's like, that's what Switzerland is. Like, we're not doing anything illegal. That's the whole premise of Geneva, is that people go there to swap currencies and to have secure bank accounts that no one can find. And another big red flag for Ron and Elaine was when he asked if they would be the directors of this corporation that he was starting. He's like, why? Why can't you have it in your name? Why does everything on paper need to be in our names? And his excuse was that he was going through a messy divorce, and this out of control ex-wife is coming for everything. So he needed a friend to put their name down on all the accounts and all the corporate papers.
So the only person that Ron and Elaine knew attached to David Davis was his daughter, whom he called Noelle, right? And they knew her as a teenager.
Yeah, he had this really sweet and quiet teenage daughter who the story sort of was that he had made all of this money as a banker in the United States. And when this messy divorce happened, he had 3 kids, but only one of them chose to come with dad instead of stay with mom. So he had this 16-year-old daughter tagging along with him in his new English life.
And it was something that happened to her that kind of shifted the whole relationship with them too. So can you bring us to that part of the story?
So Ron and Elaine, they're working for Davis. They're saving up for Canada. It's sort of like a medium-term plan. Like maybe next year we'll have enough money in the bank. But then all of a sudden, David Davis is like, you guys need to leave now. Here's my Christmas present to you. I'm going to help you guys go to Canada, but you need to leave right now. And they are sort of like, but we just bought a flat and we just bought a business. And what do you mean we have to leave right now? So he sort of pushes them out the door, and they set off to their Canada adventure ahead of schedule before they've saved up enough money to be comfortable when they arrive. And we find out later the reason why he needed them to leave so quickly is because his daughter had become pregnant. And he needed them out of the country before anyone started asking any questions about it.
So we'll get to sort of the very sinister reason behind that, which is actually a really disturbing, ugly part of it. But that sort of doesn't become really known until after we connect David Davis to Ron's death. But they go to Canada. It doesn't work. And that is sort of also very sad because Elaine and Ron break up there. Mm-hmm. And she comes home, and I guess they don't really see each other ever again.
They don't, no. They have this breakup where she comes back to England, and he would send her possessions that she'd left in Canada, send them like a ladle. And it was really weird and sad to get these packages from Canada from Ron as he was processing that she was gone. And they never did see each other again after they hugged each other goodbye at the Calgary airport when she was leaving him.
While they were in Canada, what kind of a relationship or a partnership were they having with David Davis? Were they in communication all the time? Like, what was happening there?
So David Davis did give them a bit of money to get started, and they arrived in Calgary. And it was so cold, and no one had adequately prepared Elaine for what the climate would be like. It was in February.
Oh, my God.
And they weren't liking Calgary. They couldn't find a good place in Calgary. And they're like, it's not working out. We're just bleeding money. We can't find a job. We don't have our visas in order. David Davis, can you help us? And he's like, sure, I'll give you a bit of money. Go check out Vancouver. People love Vancouver. You guys will love it. And they went to Vancouver, and they're like, this is even more expensive than Calgary. We can't live here. So then they ended up finding like off the books work in Calgary, and they were living in this sad basement apartment, and it sounds like a really miserable time. And Ron went into a depression, and Elaine was just like, this isn't what I signed up for. When her sister got married that summer, she knew that she had to go back. That was the plan all along. And she's like, I don't think I'm going to go back to Canada ever again.
Yeah.
So years pass, they definitely break up. The communication obviously starts to fall apart, which always happens. And then the next she hears that he's dead. And that's when things sort of start to turn toward David Davis. Mm-hmm. How did the police start to look toward David Davis as a possible suspect?
Yeah, well, the police had met David Davis because he was one of the only names that they could find through Ron Platt's records. On one of his rental applications for one of his apartments, he had someone in the UK.
In the UK.
Yeah, he had a character reference called David Davis. So then they're like, finally, someone who knew this guy whose body we found. So they go and they talk to David Davis, and he's just very charming. He comes in. It's like, yeah, I was talking to him, and he said that he was moving to France, and I don't know what happened. I gave him a little bit of money, and they're like, well, thanks for coming in. And that was it. Later on, police weren't able to figure out what had happened to him. Everyone sort of thought maybe he took his own life because he had been a depressive, and that wouldn't have surprised the people that did know him. It was either that, or maybe he was moving to France to start a new business, and maybe there was a boating accident or something if he took one of these ferries. So those were the two main theories. And then they needed to circle back with David Davis because Ron's family was like, hey, he said that he had that friend that was storing some things for him in Essex. Is there any family heirlooms there, or were there any photo albums or something that we should get? So the police were like, okay, we'll go. And that is when they knock on not David Davis's door, but his neighbor's door by accident. And they're like, hey, we're looking for David Davis. They're like, no, David Davis is here. The guy who lives next door, his name is Ron Platt. We just saw him a couple days ago. They're like, wait, the guy, David Davis, that they had met at the police station was going by the name to the neighbors, Ron Platt. And that accidental door knock is really what starts everything, where the police are like, we need to learn everything about this man who is living as Ron Platt.
And so what do they find out? I mean, this guy, it's spectacular, his life.
Yeah. David Davis started to be the number one suspect, and they're looking into him, and it gets to the point where they're like, we need to arrest this guy. They're questioning him, they're interrogating him, and he's doing a very good job of dodging all of their questions. And it's while he is in their custody that the police discover through a fax from Interpol, or someone who had the Interpol list, that the man in their custody was not someone called David Davis at all, but his name was Albert Walker. And he was a Canadian con man who had been on the run for 6 years and who had allegedly kidnapped his teenage daughter and been missing for the past 6 years. And the police just couldn't believe that they had, in this sleepy English town, they had one of the most wanted men in the world.
So he's Canadian, and he basically cons an entire town.
Yeah. Basically, or almost a region.
Yeah. Expand outside of the town.
Yeah. So what happened was, he was sort of this high school dropout guy who bounced from career to career. He worked as a librarian at the University of Waterloo for a time. Like he was kind of lost and didn't have a very serious job in his like teens and 20s. And while he was going from job to job, his wife was putting herself through school, and she had started like a little bookkeeping company where she helped local farmers with their taxes, essentially. And it was when he was looking over her shoulder at all the spreadsheets that he realized how much money there was in these tiny farming communities. And he's like, this is it. Like, I can be the face of a company where everyone gives us their money and we help them grow their wealth and do their taxes. It could be like this one-stop financial shop for communities like this one. So they started small, and then all of a sudden there's 6, 7 companies where he's trying to invest money on people's behalfs and promising higher returns than is possible. And he starts saying that I can protect your money from taxes by moving it all to Cayman Islands. But it seems like there was a significant period of time where they literally were doing what they were saying they were doing. I think he just got more and more greedy and was being more reckless with what he was doing with these people's money. And then when it became apparent that he wasn't going to be able to deliver on what he had promised these people, that he started stealing. And then all of a sudden, his marriage is falling apart. And I guess he made the plan where he was just going to try and get as much money as he could from this company called Walker Financial that was operating in southwestern Ontario. His whole mission was to get as much of that money into untraceable Swiss bank accounts as possible, and then just disappear forever. That's what he did a very good job of for 6 years.
Do you know how much money he ended up taking? How much did he steal?
It really varies, but the main numbers are between $3 and $12 million, because it's like, we know how much money people gave to him, but we don't have a clear idea of how much money he had lost legitimately in the bad investments in the years leading up to him disappearing. But I think it's between $3 and $12 million. And this would have been like the mid-late 80s.
Right.
So it was worth more than that.
A lot of money.
Yes.
And you mentioned that he took off and took his daughter. And one of the disturbing things that you just didn't mention was when the cops knocked on David Davis's or Ron Platt's door, he had a wife and kids.
Mm-hmm.
So who was that?
Yeah. So the woman posing as his wife in England was his teenage daughter that he had disappeared with 6 years earlier. And her name was Sheena Walker. So it was Albert Walker and his daughter, Sheena Walker. And Sheena, when the police showed up, she had two young children. She had a very young baby and a toddler.
It seems as though he has abducted his child and sexually assaulted her and had a child with her. So it's awful and horrible. But you did try to delve into that. You didn't really get too much, right? You don't know 100% that he's the father of those children.
Yeah, because he was never charged for that. And there was never a DNA test. So really, the only people who know truly were them. And there's never been any confirmation on the public record about who the father is of those children.
So how did Elaine react when she heard that the girl that she knew as his daughter, Noelle, was actually named Sheena, and that after they left for Canada, his daughter became his wife?
That was a very shocking conversation for Elaine because Noelle had seemed so young to her that, first of all, it was impossible to imagine that this quiet teenage girl that she knew had two children all of a sudden.
And I'm not kidding you. You know when you say that expression, my chin just dropped to the floor. I just was like, huh? What? How could she have children?
So that was a shock. The police were telling them, no, it's not his daughter. It's his wife. It's husband and wife that we have in custody here. And Elaine's like, no, they're for sure father and daughter because I have spent a great deal of time with them. So she couldn't believe that they had been posing as husband and wife and had convinced the police that they were husband and wife. And the other big shock from that conversation was that Noelle had been living, at least on paper, as Elaine Boys, that she had taken her name. And Elaine just couldn't believe what she was hearing in that conversation.
She was using my identity. So that was another shock. I thought, what? I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it now. Yeah, unbelievable.
It's really something. But as you mentioned, Albert, we'll call him Albert now, was never charged or even investigated for any kind of issue with his daughter. But the police did go after him for Ron Platt's murder. So how do you obviously need more than just what we've talked about, like stealing his identity. So how do they connect him to the actual death?
So they have Albert Walker in custody. They just learned that he's not David Davis and that he is, in fact, Albert Walker. And they spend the next 2 years full-time, like 4 of these police officers, their full-time job is trying to piece together what happened in the last days of Ron Platt's life. There are lots of mysteries about what Ron believed. Like, did Ron really think that he was moving to France? Or was he just helping his friend move his sailboat from one town to the other? Like, they weren't sure. But what they did figure out was that in Ron Platt's last week or perhaps 2 weeks of his life, both Albert Walker and Ron Platt were staying in different accommodations on the River Dart. And so they were in the same place at the same time. And police found the boat, and there was Ron Platt's blood was on the sail of the sailboat, and there was blood in the cabin of this boat that Albert Walker had said, oh, Ron Platt's never been on this boat. Well, his blood's on this boat. So that was very incriminating. And the other big thing was that there was a brand new device on this boat called a GPS, which was the hottest new technology. And
after fax machines.
Yes. So exactly. So when the police find this GPS unit, they get the manufacturer to bring an expert over to turn it on. They don't want to turn it on themselves. And it's like, can you glean any data from this? It's like, well, guess what? This GPS was turned off when it was out to sea, almost exactly on the spot where the fisherman had picked up the body. So that's where it was last turned off. And it happened to be turned off on the last day that anyone saw Ron Platt alive. So that was very incriminating, obviously.
Yeah. So he goes to trial. What is he charged with?
He's charged with the premeditated murder of Ron Platt.
What happened? What was the verdict?
Guilty. And it was a very fast guilty, very short deliberation. He was sentenced to life, and he served, I think it was the first 8 years in the UK, and then he was relocated to Canada, which is where he's still held today.
How old is he now?
I think either 79 or 80.
One of the things that you talk about right from the very beginning, and you sort of evolve through the whole thing, is this idea of luck and how luck played a role in even that first connection, right? And it does seem like there's a whole bunch of moments in this story over 10 years that this sort of moment of, well, I don't believe in luck, so I think it's just like circumstance that happened. But I mean, it did sort of come across that there were quite a number of those throughout this, weren't there? That if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't really know the truth.
There are so many moments like that I will never fully get over. Just the unlikelihood of finding the body in the first place. Just imagine one fisherman's net in the English Channel, fishing in one part of the channel that other fishermen won't even go because it has a rocky bottom and it messes up their nets when they get caught on the big boulders. But this one fisherman is like, it's been a bad day of fishing. Let's go over to that area where other fishermen don't go. And he accidentally finds the body within a week of it being in the water.
Yeah.
A miracle. And then just all of the little moments of the police officer losing the phone number. So they have to go, and then that officer knocks on the wrong door. And then during the year that they're gathering all of the evidence, building the case, they sort of accidentally hear about this anchor. On the day that John Copik discovered Ron Platt's body, later on that day, like the police have taken the body off his boat, and he's just cleaning up his boat, and one of his buddies walks by and he's like, hey, there's an anchor caught in your net. Is that up for grabs? I need an anchor.
Oh, yeah.
He's like, yeah, sure, man, take it. So his buddy takes it and he gives it to his wife, and it's like, yeah, sell this at a car boot sale. And then no one buys it. And then she gives it to her mom, and then she tries to sell it and it doesn't sell. So many months later, John Copik is like, that anchor was caught in the same trawl as I got the body. And I wonder if those two things are related. So he lets the police know that. And then, so they go through his friend and his friend's wife and her mom, and they find this anchor. And then they're able to prove through the zinc deposits found in Ron Platt's belt that this anchor was used to sink him to the bottom of the ocean, and that he was still breathing when he entered the water. So they miraculously find this anchor. I say in the podcast, it's literally the biggest piece of evidence in the biggest case any of those officers ever worked. Yeah. And it's just in this old lady's backyard because she couldn't successfully sell it.
Well, Sam, thanks. I mean, this is such a tragic story, but I love the way you tell it, because we don't sit in the tragedy. You also really engage us in the storytelling, and I think that's where your talents really shine. So thank you for the work, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Crime Story from CBC Podcasts. We release a new episode every Monday, so please remember to follow the show in your podcast app. You can get our next episode a week early on CBC Podcasts' YouTube channel or by subscribing to CBC Podcasts' True Crime channel on Apple Podcasts. In addition to early access, subscribers to our True Crime channel also listen ad-free. Crime Story is hosted by me, Kathleen Goldhar. Our producers are Nikki Manfredi and Mitchell Stewart. Sound design by Julian Uzielli and Mitchell Stewart. Our senior producer is Jeff Turner. Our video producer is Evan Aggard, and our YouTube producer is John Lee. Executive producers are Cecil Fernandez and Chris Oak. Tanya Springer is the senior manager of CBC Podcasts, and Arif Noorani is the director of CBC Podcasts.